Greetings fanboys and fangirls, Jared here with another video review from Fanboys Forever. Today we're going to have a look at the brand new deluxe Turtles of Grayskull Moss Man. So if you're wondering why he doesn't look like the standard Moss Man, well, this is the Moss Man that's been mutated by Krang and Shredder. Yes, you heard me right, Krang and Shredder, because this is from the Turtles of Grayskull. This is the crossover line with the Ninja Turtles. So definitely things aren't as they usually are in Eternia. I think that this is a really interesting concept for a figure, and I can't wait to see how it turned out. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the review. But before we begin, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button if you like the content you see here today, and we would really appreciate both of those things as they really do help the channel out and help us grow. So with all that out of the way, let's begin. So having a look at Moss Man here, as I pointed out, he certainly is different than what we typically perceive Moss Man to be. If we have a look at the recent exclusive from Origins, you can kind of see what we usually perceived Moss Man as, the flocked kind of green guy. But this is certainly new because I don't think we've ever seen a villainous turn for Moss Man or a villainous version. This almost reminds me more of a monster that Swamp Thing would have fought, since I'm a really big Swamp Thing fan. So that's definitely what it puts me in the mind of. Of course, this isn't the only figure from the line that has the same concept, where you have a character who's been transformed, a Master's character no less. It's been transformed into a minion for Skeletor and Shredder and Krang. So looking at the packaging, there's really, nothing that we don't usually see. I really like the artwork, of course, that we have for Moss Man. And on the back, we get a little write-up about how the character found himself in the situation. It's a little more nightmarish, a little edgier than what we would usually see for these kinds of write-ups. So I thought that was a cool touch and definitely give this kind of a harder edge to it, especially when you see what they're going for. He comes with one of those little cards like all the other deluxes come with. It tells you their powers and their stats and all of that. The interesting thing about this guy is they've gone for something they don't usually go for, which is like a Lovecraftian, eldritch kind of horror sort of vibe, and even kind of a Cthulhu thing with the tentacles and all of that back here. So it is different than what we would usually see them attempt, especially in the realm of horror, and this figure is definitely supposed to be a horror based. So let's get a better look at some of these details because there's so much to cover with this guy. Best we get started right away. Here's a better look at the profile of the figure, and you can see that the head sculpt here is actually quite different than anything that we've gotten previously for the character. Rather than being a classic iteration of Moss Man, it is more of a revisionist kind of Moss Man, something that we would see, in modern Masters Universe, or even pretty close to, say, like what we saw in Masters Universe Revelation. Definitely a far cry from the repurposed Beastman head of the original. So this is definitely like an updated kind of thing, and again, makes me think and has me raising an eyebrow thinking that this is pre-sculpting that we're seeing for an eventual new Moss Man figure, that when they revamp the line, that he's going to be one that they reuse this head and paint it in traditional Beastman colors without the translucents. Speaking of the translucents, for most of the villains, this has definitely been a running theme. Sometimes it works really well, other times it doesn't work quite as well, and we'll definitely be discussing that here. You can see that the entire body, from the head all the way down to the legs to even some of the accessories, have that transparent look to it. The only opaque pieces are the armor that he wears and another switch out piece that we'll look at later. And to be perfectly honest here, I'm not exactly sure that it works as well as they were hoping it would. You have a figure like, Merman over there, that if you didn't check out my review of that, he's definitely, a masterwork when it comes to utilizing paint and translucent plastic to get like a really cool effect. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, or on the other hand, Moss Man isn't quite as creative with his use of the translucent plastic. There isn't a whole lot in terms of like color variation, so he just ends up being, flat, transparent, kind of green plastic the whole way. And then you have the opaque nature of this harness and everything. And I think that the one thing that it's really missing is something to kind of highlight the face more. Because if you look at, say, Merman's face from the previous review, there's a lot of paint going on there, so that you can really have the face highlighted. You can see all the features, it isn't lost, the sculpt isn't lost in the translucence. And unfortunately, Mossman's sculpt is lost here in all of this translucent plastic. It definitely feels more like a variant of a standard figure rather than the standard version. I know that there's been a couple of versions of Ram Man where one is translucent and one is more opaque. I have the more opaque version. I definitely think that also for that character, opaque plastic works better. And I'm really hoping that there's another version of this guy out there that uses more of an opaque green, because I feel like that there's too much detail being lost in that initial head sculpt. I do think we need to have a look at the back, because there is quite a bit going on back here with all sorts of new pieces. This figure is full of new parts and pieces that we just haven't seen in the line so far. These tentacles here are really cool. It's very symbiote-like if you're a Spider-Man fan, you know, like the Venom and Carnage symbiotes. With these big tendrils, they have lots of texturing on them, actually, which I think is a nice touch. And I really like how weird and slimy that the armor looks. But again, I'll say that the problem is that it's a little too flat here. Now, I know that this is just opaque, so it's not translucent, but there's not enough paint variety. Whereas with the Merman, we saw the spikes, they were colored with bone white, bone yellow. This doesn't have any of that, it's just purple. And then you have this, which is like a separate plastic piece, and it's just, it needed more paint. It honestly did. There's no other way to say it. That's the thing that the figure is lacking, is more paint variety. But we'll look and see how we can mitigate that. Moving on down, you can see that he has kind of a rare combination of colors down here, with this dark kind of rust red and the dark green on the furry shorts. And he has monster feet, kind of different than the monster feet we usually see in Origins. All right, so now that we've had a look at the basic figure itself and the good and the bad, and I definitely think that the good is the sculpting, I definitely think the bad is the presentation of that sculpt. They end up losing so much of it. But I do want to talk about accessories, because this figure has quite a few, and I think that's where a lot of the interest comes from. You know, one of the accessories that he comes with is this giant, like, a hand of vines, and they're translucent, and I think it's really cool looking. You can see it's actually fairly similar to the one that came with the Revelation Mossman, and that it was like a thing he can hold that's like an extended hand, like a Swamp Thing kind of gimmick. I really like this. I think that, yes, it could have used some more paint, because it's just translucent plastic. And as a matter of fact, Brandon, the guy who's sometimes on the channel with me, had to inform me that this was a canister of ooze, and I'm pretty sure it is. But the thing is, I could have never told that was a canister of ooze, because it just gets lost and without any kind of color. So it's a real shame. I almost want to go in with my chrome silver marker and at least do the caps. I think that would look really nice. It's a really nice, like, sculpted piece. But the other weird thing is that instead of having a more like predetermined handle, you have to use one of the vines to hold it. And it actually works pretty well, but this thing is sort of heavy. And even though he holds it really well, I think that it really does weigh him down quite a bit. And this is a figure that can't afford to be weighed down. And that brings me to one of the other big negatives. Used to, with Masters of the Universe Classics back in the day, this would happen all the time. You would have one ankle hinge that was really tight, and you would have another one that was pretty loose. And I hadn't actually seen that in a while, but this figure brings back the old tradition, like it was 2010. We have one ankle that's really loose and the other that's really tight. So he doesn't hold poses that well without wanting to just fall over. So, you know, you can kind of stand him up and it's fine if he's not holding the giant hand and all of that. But even then, he's trying to like come forward a little bit. So he was trickier to stand than I thought he would be too. But adding the giant hand makes him tip right over. Another way that he can utilize accessories is he actually has the ability to hold the tendrils. You can actually take this one tendril right here, and you can see that it's curved, and I'm pretty sure the intention is he's supposed to hold it. So I actually think that's a really neat option. But there's lots of interchangeable head options with this figure, so let's go ahead and pop that off. He does come with a neck adapter piece to extend the neck out, and I actually really like that. I think that's a cool looking piece. Honestly, you could probably just take the barbell piece out up there, just heat it up, and this would look really cool, as if maybe he like slimed someone's head or something. On the back, you even have more of the tentacles. So let me show you what you can attach up here at the top. The most obvious option, I suppose, is to just attach Mossman's head up there. And I actually think that looks pretty cool. it does make the figure look a little more interesting, and I think it saves it from that kind of blandness. So I think this is a great way to display it, and takes Mossman, a typically heroic character, and makes him more of a horror character, a villain character. So I think that looks really cool. But probably the main usage for this is actually attaching this kind of Venus flytrap head. And let me show you what it looks like. This is really wild. It's definitely not the kind of thing I expected them to include, but here it is. It has a tongue attached to the top part, like the roof of the mouth there. Then we have the bottom part of the jaw, and this actually hinges. This kind of looks like something you would have seen Poison Ivy use in Batman and Robin back in '97. It has those outrageous colors. I really like the spray in here. They have a translucent tongue. The interesting thing then is that you can take it down here, and it has a little peg hole. You could actually just attach it at the base of the head down here, and you can see that you would have more of just a standard size plant monster. You can almost get this as like a lackey, or him just taking his head and turning it into this. It's kind of disturbing to think about that, actually. But I think that looks pretty cool, and I'm sure you can do some pretty cool poses with the jaws chomping down on some of the heroes. But I think the actual intended configuration is that you're supposed to use the neck extender and then add the Venus flytrap head to it that way. And you get something really horrific looking. And I think that's awesome. It's the kind of thing that I really didn't think they would ever do. And it really stretches the idea that he's truly a villainous character here and more of a horror character. And it's definitely territory I didn't think they would go in for this line. I think it looks cool from different angles too, like from the side and even from the back. I think the one thing that's missing here is, wouldn't it have been nice if there was another neck peg or connector somehow to where you could have had the Mossman head inside of it? Because that's the thing. This looks really cool, but is it even really Mossman anymore? And there's no real good way to put the head on. I mean, I guess you could take the end of the tongue and you could brace the head like inside of it, and you could kind of do something like that. But I mean, it doesn't necessarily work. It looks pretty cool, but I would have much rather had a more secure connection or something up here, anything to where he would have still been recognizable as Mossman. But that's the thing. He loses a lot of the identity of the character here and just becoming kind of a weird looking villain. And maybe that's the intention. And if it is, that's okay. But I just would like it to remain recognizable. And that's the weird thing about this figure. I prefer it just as a plant monster more than I do as a Mossman. Because as Mossman, it's kind of working against itself with the lack of paint application here. But as a big plant monster figure, you can just put the Venus flytrap head on it, and it becomes kind of awesome that way. But let me show you some options that you have with this armor if you do just want it to be Evil Beastman. You have this thing that comes off right here, and the truth is, I don't know what it is. It kind of looks like an alien face hugger to me, so that's kind of what I think it's supposed to be. Like, you could take it and put it on a character's face maybe, but it doesn't really have a way to stay necessarily. So I'm not 100% sure what the intention is. I can't really put it on a wrist. I guess he can hold it. I guess he's more just supposed to throw it at people. I don't know, but I do know that it leaves, this kind of gap piece right here, and I don't think it comes with anything else to plug in. So I'm still slightly confused about it, but I do think it's neat. Whatever it is, it's a cool thing. I'm glad it's there. It gives the figure some visual interest. Would have looked a lot better with a little bit of a paint wash. That might be something that I add some black wash right there. The other thing you can do is, if you don't like the tentacles, you can easily just take those off. And so it gives you a slightly more traditional looking Mossman, and he's just wearing some armor this way. Speaking of a traditional Mossman, you may be wondering, can't you just put that head on there? Well, you can, but the green doesn't match up at all. So unfortunately, that's not much of an option. And even though, once again, the green doesn't match at all, another head that actually does fit on there is the Revelation head. And it looks pretty cool, but it doesn't really match, and it's actually a little small. Now, just so you can see, of course, this figure can be disassembled. You can remove all those bits of armor. And honestly, like this, I think he's much more palatable, really. For whatever reason, to me, it works more when he's a little closer to the Mossman that we all kind of know and love. And I think this is plenty creepy like this. Would it have been better with a wash over this head sculpt to where you could see more detail? Of course it would have been. But at least this way, he's a little more recognizable, and I think it's kind of a cool look, even if it's not exactly perfect. You can see that they do have, you know, that kind of veiny paint work that we've been seeing on some of the other mutated characters. But like I said, for me, he loses a lot this way, and he's just too basic this way. But then when you add the other stuff, it's too busy. So visually, something's kind of not really coming together there. And definitely one of the weirder comparisons you'll ever see on this channel. These are both Mossman, but boy, are they different. And again, you know, you add any kind of light over here and you lose all the detail in this head sculpt. You see it just all blends together. So yeah, definitely went wrong there. And another absolutely wild comparison. I actually think that the Mossman figure is really cool and ages really well from that first wave of Masterverse. But if you look at the stock, the insane stock that they have of the guy and Ollie's, I'm not sure anybody agreed with me on that one. So, and here's another question I have about this headpiece. Why isn't there a way to attach this to the arm? I feel like another adapter giving us the ability to have this on the arm would have been absolutely ideal. Now, one thing you could do is put the neck adapter into the flower piece and try to use this main tendril as a way for him to hold it, kind of like he would the hand extension back there. And it doesn't work as well as you would hope it would. It feels like it's just hanging on by a prayer, but yeah, it just isn't quite working. I feel like there's got to be a better way to connect it to make it a weapon that he can use. So it's kind of a cumbersome figure to try and work with, because there's all these things you think you should be able to do, and it's just not working out the way you hope. Like I said, if Lady Luck is on your side, maybe you'll be able to pose this, but these are my sad attempts. As you can see, it just droops right down. It's just too much weight. In concept, this should probably be the mutated figure that I like the most. I've always been a huge fan of Mossman, and, you know, I'm a big Swamp Thing guy. So I'm all about, you know, swamp monsters and scary eldritch horror creatures and Lovecraftian kind of horror. And so this one should tick all the boxes for me, right? But I love it in concept, but just not in execution. Unfortunately, there are issues here that keep this from getting to that kind of platinum tier that I put Merman on back there. The paintwork just isn't interesting, what little paint that there is. The head sculpt is completely lost in the translucent. All the details are gone. And we have a head accessory here that kind of takes away his identity as Mossman, but doesn't have a good option to actually mount it onto the wrist to use it as an accessory. And the one that he can hold has kind of a weird way to hold it, and it weighs the figure down and does some strange things there. Unfortunately, the figure lacks modularity. You don't have many good options about where to put things, and the stuff that looks the best, like having this replaced onto the head, makes it effectively not a Mossman figure anymore. So it's really a catch-22. But as it stands, I think these pieces were probably more developed with Vecna in mind, the Stranger Things villain, because we have that 2-pack coming out pretty soon of He-Man and Vecna, where he uses a bunch of this tooling, which makes me think that maybe a bunch of this was developed for him, and the team thought, you know what, we can use this again as a Mossman. Now, I don't know it went that way. Maybe it's the other way around. So I actually decided after filming the review to go ahead and try my hand at bringing out some of these details in the face, and I think it went really well. It was very simple. All I did was just take a Gundam marker, and of course those are just a very fine tipped paint marker, a black one, and I went through and I traced out all the details in the sculpting around the face, particularly the hair and the sides of the cheeks and things. Then I went through with a little bit of paint thinner, and with a paper towel I just very simply dabbed off any of the excess, and I was left with this. As you can see, it's a pretty stark contrast compared to the version that basically had no detail in it, and it was very hard to even make out Mossman's facial features. Another reason why I like this modification is that it doesn't change at all the spirit of the figure. It's just very simply just going through and making sure you can see the details that are already there. And if you notice, I also went inside the mouth, and I filled that in with black as well, because I think that makes a really big difference. And if you noticed, I did put just a little tiny dab with a paint marker that I got from the Michael's craft store of red on those spikes, just to give it a little more visual interest, and it matches the belt and the bracelets and things. So I thought that was also a good addition. With these things in place, it really does help the figure visually, and it kind of restores it being an evil version of Mossman, rather than losing the character amongst all that translucent plastic. Another thing that I went back and decided I would try my hand at again is to attempt to once again use the Venus flytrap thing as an accessory, because I struck out last time trying, and I thought, well, surely there's a way. All right, I'm going to try this hand instead over here, but I think the problem is still the weight of the Venus flytrap head. Maybe if he leans like way back, that's by far as good as I can do, all right? And he's leaned practically all the way back. And you see he didn't stay there long. Even though it is technically possible to hold this thing in his hand, he simply cannot balance with it. If you want to eliminate that adapter piece, you could have him hold it by the tongue right here. And I've actually found that that's probably the better solution, because you can see that that's actually pretty possible. However, that kind of gets you a new problem because it's sort of turned around the wrong way. You could probably finagle it to where if you take the wrist and you take the hinge and kind of have him bring it out to the side, it doesn't look half bad like that. But then you have more balancing issues because one side is now pretty heavy. You can get it to look halfway decent with it if you just cut out the adapter piece altogether. In that case, you could just use it on the head. And with far more effort than it ever should have taken, here he is with all of his accessories. Yes, it is possible if you use the trick with him holding the Venus flytrap by the tongue. One good thing about this is if you let this just make contact with the ground, he's kind of leaning into it. You can also see the face touch-ups I did are doing a little bit of the heavy lifting by making sure we can still recognize this as Mossman. So yeah, there's definitely some improvements that can be made to this guy. You know, overall, I do have my gripes with him. He's definitely not in the same league necessarily as Merman, but I can't help but absolutely love the idea of this figure. It does take some creative thinking to solve some of the issues that the figure presents, but once you do, you'll find that it really is worth your time and effort to see just what a great figure this is underneath. Some of these issues are simply just surface level kind of things, and really this guy is super fun. As a matter of fact, he reminds me tremendously of the Unmen villains from the Swamp Thing toy line from Kenner, and with the kind of replacement head that slips over and all of that. And if you guys know what I'm talking about, then you know what a match this is for those old toys. Even with the translucence and things, that was also an element of those with the monster heads. So I really do think that this might be somebody's homage at Mattel. So I really do think that's a very cool thing if true. Anyway though, friends, leave me your comments down below and let me know what you think about this Mossman. Are you going to give it a shot at maybe trying to bring out some of those face details? At least maybe coloring in that mouth black to kind of help it stand out a little bit more? Is it something you're not going to bother with? Did you also have some trouble trying to get him to hold all these different accessories? Let me know down below in the comments. And as always, God bless you and yours. And I'll see you on Fanboys Forever. Fanboy out. You know, in concept, this should probably be the one that I like the most out of all the, woohoo, see what I mean?